Two cops arrested a man in front of his own house, then walked into court and realized he was the judge. They didn't ask him for a license. They didn't ask where he was headed. They didn't even say why they stopped him. All they saw was a black man sitting in a black BMW, parked near the curb on a quiet street in Plano, Texas. Engine still running, jazz humming low through the speakers. And it was enough. Judge Raymond Ellison, 52 years old, 3 decades in law, father of 2 grown kids, known for his quiet, fair demeanor in the courtroom, was just trying to get home after a long evening. His best friend, Calvin Lewis, had just retired from the bench. They'd had drinks, hugs, stories. He wasn't drunk. Ray didn't drink like that. Just tired, dressed in slacks, and a faded North Carolina A&T hoodie. Nothing about him screamed, "Your Honor." Not that night. It was a little after midnight. He was parked in front of his own house. He'd leaned back in the driver's seat for a second, trying to clear his head before heading inside. His porch light was still on. The neighborhood was dead quiet. Then flashing lights behind him. No siren. 2 cops stepped out, one on each side, one flashlight shining straight in his face. Ray rolled down the window halfway. Calm, always calm. "Evening, officers. Is there a problem?" No greeting back, just a command. "Turn off the engine. Keep your hands where we can see them." He did as told. Ray kept his voice even. "I live here. You can check the mailbox, or I can show you my ID." Another light flashed into the back seat. "Step out of the vehicle." "Sir," Ray said, trying not to let his annoyance show, "I'm a sitting judge. You might want to—" "Out, now." He hesitated just for a breath. That breath was all it took. One of the officers opened the door and grabbed his arm. "What are you doing?" Ray asked, raising both hands. "I haven't done anything wrong." But by then, it was already too far gone. The second cop had circled around, hand on his holster. "Stop resisting," the first one barked. "I'm not resisting. I'm trying to identify myself." They weren't listening. The next moment, his head was being pushed against the hood of his own car, his left cheek against cold metal, wrists yanked back. "You're under arrest for failure to comply with a lawful order," one of them said. Neighbors were starting to peek out their windows. Raymond Ellison, 52, father, judge, neighbor, was now the suspicious black man in handcuffs, arrested in front of his own house in the middle of the night, with nobody bothering to ask his name. But the next morning, they'd learn exactly who he was. They didn't take him downtown, just to the nearest station off Parker Road, a small brick building with flickering lights and stale vending machine coffee. No one offered to call anyone. No one asked if he was okay. They didn't even take his wallet out of the evidence tray to check his ID. They booked him like he was nobody. Fingerprint, mugshot, shoes off, belongings bagged. Raymond sat in a holding cell for 6 hours, surrounded by the low murmur of snoring, coughing, and the occasional yelling from deeper in the building. The concrete bench was cold and stiff. His back ached. His pride bruised. He asked to speak to a supervisor twice. The desk officer waved him off both times. Third time, the man didn't even look up. "I'm Judge Raymond Ellison," he said firmly. "Call your supervisor." "Yeah, and I'm the mayor," the officer mumbled without lifting his eyes from the computer. No one looked him in the face. No one gave him a name. They didn't have to. To them, he was just another arrest to process and forget. It wasn't until 7:12 a.m. that someone from records finally scanned his driver's license and paused, then stood still, then walked fast out of the room. Within 20 minutes, the entire tone shifted. A higher-ranking officer came in, apologized stiffly, and told him he was being released. No charges filed. "Mistaken identity," they said. "Precautionary arrest," they said. "Just following procedure." Ray didn't say a word as they handed back his watch, keys, and phone. He didn't look at anyone. He walked out the front doors, got in a cab, and rode home in silence. But his silence didn't last. By that evening, his attorney, Deborah Langston, had already filed a formal complaint with Internal Affairs, not just for wrongful arrest, but for racial profiling, excessive force, and procedural misconduct. "You sure you want to go through with this?" she asked him over the phone. "You know how it'll look. Some folks will say you're just mad you didn't get special treatment." "I don't want special treatment," Ray answered. "I want what I'm owed as a citizen. I want what any black man should be owed: dignity, respect, basic decency, and they gave me none of that." His voice cracked a little near the end. He didn't care. Deborah paused. "All right, then we'll see it through." And just like that, the fire was lit. A day later, it hit the local news, then the state outlets. Sitting judge wrongfully arrested by Plano police. They showed his bruised wrist, his face, his mugshot. Viewers across Texas were stunned, but not everyone was shocked. Black residents of the city, of the state, weren't surprised. This was old news in a new suit. It just so happened that this time the man in the cuffs had the power to call it out. The city scrambled. The department promised a full review. The chief released a tight-lipped statement about due process. And the two officers, Detectives Brandon Keller and Scott Martinez, were placed on administrative leave pending an internal hearing. But what they didn't know was who would be sitting on the bench when they walked into that hearing. The following Monday, Judge Ellison stood at his kitchen window, staring out at his driveway. Same spot, same car. But something had shifted. His wife, Simone, was setting a plate of scrambled eggs on the table. She didn't say anything at first, just looked at him. "You sure you're ready to go back?" she asked. He gave a slow nod. "I've been ready since they opened that car door." She sat down across from him, folded her hands. "You looked different when you came home that morning. Not angry, not shaken, just done. Like something in you was tired in a way I haven't seen before." He didn't reply. He just took a sip of coffee. Later that day, he was back in his chambers at the Collin County Courthouse, robe on the coat hook, nameplate back on the door, but this time he was the center of attention in ways he hadn't asked for. His assistant, Kenny, peeked in with a file. "You got internal affairs coming in tomorrow? You still want to be on the bench for it?" Ray nodded. "Yeah, if they've got a problem with it, they can file a motion." Kenny smirked. "Bet they won't." Meanwhile, the city was buzzing. Local activists had already begun organizing. One group launched a petition to get both officers fired. Another called for citywide training reforms. The NAACP chapter held a press conference in front of the courthouse steps, calling Judge Ellison's arrest a symptom of a much larger disease. News vans parked outside his house for days. Commentators on TV debated whether his role as a judge gave him an unfair platform, as if he hadn't earned it, as if being publicly humiliated wasn't enough. But Ray didn't feed the cameras. He stayed quiet. It was the hearing he was focused on. Internal Affairs scheduled it for Friday morning, 9 a.m. sharp. Officers Keller and Martinez would be expected to answer for their actions. The proceedings weren't open to the public, but that didn't stop word from spreading. The officers thought they were walking into a typical inquiry. They didn't check the docket. They didn't bother to learn who the judge would be. Maybe they assumed it would be someone else. Someone who didn't know what it felt like to have a badge pointed at their chest. Someone who didn't know the weight of silence when you're being wrongly accused. But as they pushed through the heavy wooden doors into courtroom 2B, the first thing they saw was his name, Judge Raymond Ellison, engraved on the plaque beneath the seal of Texas. Then they saw him, sitting behind the bench, robe on, face still, eyes locked. Detective Keller froze mid-step. Martinez's face went pale. They didn't say a word. Ray didn't flinch. He leaned forward, tapped the gavel once, and spoke calmly into the mic. "Court is now in session." But no one in that room could pretend this was just another case. For a full 10 seconds, no one moved. The sound of the gavel still echoed faintly through the courtroom as the two detectives stood stiff near the defense table. Their attorney, a younger man in a wrinkled gray suit, shuffled papers nervously. He clearly hadn't been briefed. Detective Keller glanced at his lawyer, then back at Judge Ellison. His lips parted slightly like he wanted to speak, but he didn't. Detective Martinez kept his eyes low, like the floor was safer than the truth. Raymond scanned the courtroom, not just at the officers, but at everyone. The clerk, the internal affairs reps, even the court reporter. All of them were watching him, wondering how he'd play it. He tapped his finger twice on the bench, leaned forward slightly and said, "Let the record show that the hearing regarding administrative conduct of Detectives Keller and Martinez will proceed as scheduled. I see no cause for recusal." There was a silence in the room that didn't feel quiet. It felt thick. He continued, "I will not serve as judge, jury, and executioner, but I will preside over this hearing as required by my position. If any party has an objection, speak now." Nobody spoke, so it began. The IA officer, a woman named Sergeant Olivia Chen, called her first witness, a middle-aged resident who'd witnessed the arrest from her living room window. She took the stand. Voice trembling, she told the room how she watched from behind her curtain as her neighbor, the nice man with the black BMW, was slammed against his own hood in the dark. "I knew it was him," she said. "He always waves when he sees me walking my dog, always polite. But that night, they didn't give him a chance." Next, body cam footage. No sound at first, just images on the screen. Ray watched as his own face appeared, blurry, grainy, framed by flashlight glare, his hands visible, open, calm. Then the audio kicked in. The room heard it all. "I live here. I can show you my ID. I'm a sitting judge." And then, "Stop resisting! I'm not resisting!" The courtroom was dead silent. Keller fidgeted in his seat. Martinez looked like he wanted to vanish. Their attorney tried to interrupt. "Your Honor, I believe this video is being interpreted without—" Ray held up a hand. "You'll have time for cross. Right now, I'm listening." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't make a show of it. He didn't need to. Each clip, each testimony, each pause spoke for itself. By the time the last piece of evidence was presented, there was nothing left to question. Still, Ray looked directly at the two officers. Finally, he spoke to them. "Would either of you like to make a statement?" Keller glanced at Martinez. Martinez looked away. "No, Your Honor," Keller said, barely audible. Ray nodded. He looked at the clock. 11:47 a.m. He leaned back in his chair and folded his hands. But what neither of them realized was that the hardest part hadn't started yet. The courtroom doors shut with a soft click. You could almost hear people holding their breath. Raymond didn't move at first, just sat with his fingers steepled beneath his chin, looking straight ahead. He wasn't just a judge right now. He was a man who'd tasted what too many others had lived with for decades. This wasn't theory. This was personal. He took a slow breath. "Detective Keller, Detective Martinez," he began, voice level. "I've reviewed the footage. I've heard the testimony. This is your opportunity to explain what happened that night from your perspective." Silence. Then reluctantly, Keller cleared his throat and stood up. "Your Honor," he said, still not looking him in the eye, "we responded to a call about a suspicious vehicle in a quiet residential area. It was late. No lights on in the house. We approached with caution. The subject, refused to exit the vehicle, and he didn't identify himself right away. Given the circumstances, we followed standard procedure." Ray tilted his head. "You say he didn't identify himself. What did he say when you approached?" "He said he lived there. He mentioned being a judge, but we didn't—" Ray cut in. "So he told you he lived there, and he told you who he was?" "Yes, but—" "Then what part of that wasn't identifying himself?" Keller blinked. "We didn't know if it was true. That's why we carry radios, Detective. To verify, not escalate." Keller sat down. Ray turned to Martinez. "Anything to add?" Martinez just shook his head. "No, sir." "Let me ask you something, Detective Martinez," Ray said. "If I had been a white man sitting in that same car wearing the same hoodie, do you think we'd be sitting here today?" Martinez's mouth tightened. I don't know, Your Honor." "That's fair. I didn't expect you to." Ray's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Every word hit harder because of the control behind it. He turned to the internal affairs team. "You've seen the evidence, heard the officers, so have I. But before we close, I want to share something. Not as a judge, but as the man who spent the night in that cell." Everyone leaned in just slightly. Even the court reporter stopped typing for a second. "When they arrested me, they didn't see a judge. They didn't even see a human being. They saw a black man in a nice car in a neighborhood they didn't think he belonged in. That was it. No questions, no pause, just hands on guns and orders shouted." He paused, looking straight at the two officers. "I've seen people in this courtroom, young men, women, kids, charged for doing far less than what you two did to me, and I've had to sentence them. Not because I wanted to, but because the law said I had to." He turned his gaze to the ceiling for a second, gathering himself. "But today, I get to choose. I get to weigh this not just with law, but with conscience." Silence again. No one moved. Ray turned back to internal affairs. The officer's conduct was excessive, unjustified, and deeply inappropriate. The question is whether it was criminal. He paused. That's your decision to investigate further. But as for me, he looked straight at Keller, then Martinez. I don't want revenge. I don't want apologies you don't mean. I want change, and I want you to carry the weight of this moment for the rest of your careers. Every time you pull someone over, every time you flash a badge, I want you to remember the man you arrested without even asking his name. Neither officer said a word. Ray turned back to the room. I recommend mandatory de-escalation training, a full department review, and a 30-day suspension without pay for both officers. Whispers buzzed in the room. Some people wanted more. Others looked relieved. But Ray wasn't finished. I hope that one day you both become the kind of officers who don't just follow orders, but understand the responsibility you carry every single time you put that badge on. He stood up slowly. Court is adjourned. But justice in this room wasn't about punishment. It was about accountability. Ray stood in his chambers alone, robe draped over the back of his chair. The silence felt different now. Not the silence of being ignored, dismissed, or locked up. This was the silence of aftermath. He looked down at the file still open on his desk, the final write-up of his ruling, signed and sealed. The knock at the door was soft. Come in. Simone stepped in, coat still draped over her shoulders, eyes studying him. She hadn't spoken much after the hearing. She'd just watched him carry a weight most people could never understand. You did what you had to do, she said. I did what I could live with, he answered. She came over, sat across from him, and reached for his hand. Some people were mad you didn't come down harder. He nodded. Yeah, they wanted blood. Why didn't you? Ray leaned back in his chair, eyes up toward the ceiling. Because I know what revenge feels like. It burns fast, feels righteous, but it doesn't build anything. And the people watching me today, young men like I used to be, they needed to see restraint, not rage. Simone watched him closely. You still believe in the system? I believe in people. I believe people can change. Systems? That depends on who's running them. A beat passed. She gave a small smile. You ever think about retiring? Ray chuckled. Every morning. Then I remember why I started. The city was already reacting. News outlets quoted his words, playing back the courtroom footage on every station. Some praised his dignity. Others called him too soft. The online world exploded with takes from every direction. But a few stories began to surface that mattered more than all the noise. A young officer from another district wrote a public post about watching the hearing and realizing how easily he could have been the one on trial. A teacher used the footage in her classroom to start a discussion about authority and humanity, and one of Ray's old law students sent him a voicemail. Judge, I just wanted to say, watching you today reminded me why I went to law school. Thank you. Those were the voices Ray listened to. Back in his chambers, he looked down at the nameplate on his desk. Judge Raymond Ellison. Then he turned it around so it faced the room, because the title meant nothing if people didn't see the man behind it. A week later, the city of Plano held a press conference. The police department announced a new partnership with an independent oversight committee. Officers would now be required to complete annual de-escalation and racial bias training, not just new recruits, but everyone, top to bottom. Detectives Keller and Martinez were both suspended without pay for 30 days. When they returned, they would start with a reassignment. Neither would be working patrol again for a long time. No public apology. But the change spoke louder. Ray didn't attend the press conference. He didn't need to. He was back to work. Same chair, same robe, same courtroom. But nothing was the same. He noticed the difference in the way other officers walked into his courtroom now. A little straighter, a little quieter, like they knew they were standing in front of someone who'd lived the truth, not just studied it. Outside the courthouse, a high school student waited one morning as Ray stepped out of his car. Judge Ellison? He turned. Yes? The boy looked nervous. I wanted to say thank you for standing up, for not yelling, for showing how to fight without throwing punches. Ray smiled. You planning on going into law? The boy nodded. Good, Ray said. Then make sure you remember that this, he gestured to his chest, to his skin, this will always mean something to some people. but it never has to define what you become. They shook hands. The boy walked away, shoulders a little higher. Raymond Ellison walked into the courthouse, not just as a judge, but as a reminder, because sometimes the most powerful form of justice isn't punishment. It's forcing the system to see you and still choosing not to become what it tried to make you. If this story moved you, share it. Let someone know that dignity can't be stripped away with handcuffs, and that real change begins when we refuse to stay silent.